What we'll see today is high-level requirements, some common mistakes, and then we'll dive in and do 3 different workflow creations today. Okay. Docstar was developed to run every document through a workflow. So in my experience with the number of ECMs, sometimes you can just capture something and enter the data in the content fields, which you can do here as well. The difficulty is finding those documents later. So that's the concept of a workflow queue. It's basically your inbox. And then the benefit of a workflow is that if you have multiple people working on a document, there's queues and people can work from those queues. Some of the common things that I see all the time is that most of your end users don't realize when you capture something, it triggers a workflow. So they'll capture a bunch of stuff and then it's just stuck in a workflow and nobody's answered the filing questions. So when I talk about workflows, it's typically what are the filing instructions. So you'll see here on this little screenshot in the top corner is this workflow accordion, which is asking the user, we call them user prompts, to a prompt, select document type, enter employee name. The benefit of using that is really the simplicity of that interface for that user. But that accordion is usually at the bottom by default. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to move that. It's really important to have that in the top left-hand corner. So filing instructions are right there and clearly displayed so end users can do and review those. We also see a lot of older methodologies. So back when I talked about Docstar 3X, it used something called title and keywords. So basically 2 fields, and we cram everything into those 2 fields versus having like separate fields like vendor name, contract party, start date, end date. We used to throw everything in title and keywords. So if that's the case, you might want to engage us for some redesign. All right. Why would you want to use a workflow? So again, there's a lot here. Most of you are just using this for filing. I'm going to show you a couple examples where we can actually use workflows for capture-based examples. Things like OCR'ing, or optical character, of all the words on a page and being able to search for those. The ability to use barcodes or barcode separation. The ability to use our zone OCR functionality with regular expressions. The ability to apply stamps to documents. So we'll go through some of these. If you are in a kind of more heavily compliant scenario, we can actually use a workflow to change the security based on the metadata. So for instance, if I'm a patient and I'm Brent, my care coordinator is Betty, only Betty can see Brent. How do you do that? How do you implement that in a workflow? So we've done that multiple times. Okay, and I'm just going to open up a document. Now you'll notice here, my workflow accordion, it's usually down here. So by default, that workflow accordion is down here. And you notice what I do is, first thing I do is I drag that to the top. Now that's going to work for you, for your particular workstation. Not have to just add a bunch of documents into the workflow and not actually go in and index them. So that's what this little auto view is. So if you do have the client and you can check this little box, the benefit of that is that when somebody captures something, they're going to be immediately prompted with that workflow accordion, and somebody can then answer right away. If you don't have this checked, what happens is it won't automatically prompt the user to enter the workflow. They would have to then go to the workflow queue and manually select. And this is what happens, and they see this with a lot of customers, which is, they have thousands of documents just sitting in the workflow queue. They're searchable by, the content and the title, but nothing else. Out of the box, everybody gets workflow. We call it standard workflow. What that means is you get one cube, one step as part of that workflow. So if then logic, right? If this is that, then do this. The problem is you can't do else. That's where advanced workflow licensing comes in. So if you want to be able to branch conditions, so something we're going to do an approval routing today. So say, for instance, we route something for approval, somebody hits approve, but it's over $1,000. You want to route that to the next person. And then if it's over 10,000, go to another person. That you would need advanced workflow. So out of the box, you get one step if then logic. If you want full advanced workflow, you can add that to your existing subscription or license. If it is subscription based, it's $59 per user per month. If it's on premise, we charge a one-time server licensing fee it's not per user. So we do have two licensing models. There's 84 different functions available. We're going to go through quite a few of those today. And you can daisy chain these together. So for instance, in our approval, we're going to show you how a document comes in. We're going to go and read a value, go out, pull some data, and based on that, route it for approval. If it's approved, we're going to move it to a process folder. If it's rejected, we're going to move to a denied folder. Okay. So where do you access workflows? So the first thing is obviously you have the workflow tab at the top. And that's where your workflows are going to be. Essentially, it's a URL that you'd have access to. Now, where do you actually configure the workflows is actually in the admin tab, and then you'll see this workflow designer. There's this little box to the right of the link there that will allow the workflow designer to open in its own tab in the browser. It gives you a lot more visibility versus if you hit the workflow designer link, that's going to load in as an iframe within the current screen. And it's just harder. It's just not as much area. Now, once you create a workflow, how does the workflow get called? Okay, so when you create a content type, we're not going to go through all that today, but in a content type, there is a little spot for workflow where you will select the workflow you want to run by default. So once we create a workflow, we're then going to assign it to the content type. So workflows can be both capture or document based. And what I mean by that is capture based would be something like I want to read a barcode. I want to split on a barcode. I want to zone in on a specific area of the document. I want to use regular expression searching to actually pull certain information out. Or something like image enhancement. I want to clean up the image. All those are capture workflows. Document-based workflows might be something like approval routing. I want to route it based on a hierarchy of approval levels. Or I want to be able to change the security on a document or stamp it approved with some metadata. So typically, how do you initiate a workflow? Typically, it's when you capture the document and you select the content type. That workflow is already assigned to that content type and will trigger automatically. You can go in and select the document and manually trigger it. You can also trigger it based on a wait for database task. So for instance, we might want to wait for a data value in a database to be true before that actual workflow instantiates. All right, so the main categories you see here, capture. We also have what I would consider metadata. And so you have a lot of capability, and this is a common one, right? We want to grab the file name, which comes in as the title, and we want to parse out the .pdf or the .xls or something like that. We can use string manipulation. We can do things like split text, right? And we can remove the .pdf. We can maybe look for a delimiter, something like an underscore or a hash or something, comma, something to that effect, and then parse the different values out. You can do that with all the string manipulation capabilities. You also have mathematical stuff. So when you're doing things like accounts payable automation, taking, grab the PO, find the total amount on the PO, and then compare that to the total amount on the invoice. Do those match? So the ability to do conditional is verify, verify that this actually is a match. So you have all those capabilities. You also have routing capabilities. So we're going to show a request of an approval. If you do have advanced workflow, you can also use the change workflow. This is really helpful. So say, for instance, you bring something into accounts payable, and there's a default workflow. And again, you can only assign one workflow to the content type. Well, what happens if we read a metadata and actually there's a PO number associated with this invoice? So we can actually change the workflow on the fly. If there's a PO number, we do a compare verify, and then we say, hey, there is a PO, so change the workflow to have it go over here. That's super helpful. And again, you have to have that add advanced workflow capability. Some local stuff. You're going to see a blue cube next to that. It means that the client needs to be present to execute those tasks. Good example, OCR. That happens on your workstation, right? So as long as you have the client somewhere in your network, you'll be able to OCR documents, use barcode recognition, barcode separation. Any of that stuff requires the client. And again, that's what this Docstar client application is here that you see. You'll notice that things like image processing and those types of things are all specific to OCR. Okay. Anything in yellow, when we get into the workflow designer, means that a user needs to trigger it. Okay, so user needs to enter that information. They'll be prompted for it. The system will not do it automatically. And then blue and yellow together means it will happen automatically. So for instance, something like a clear approvals or compare verify, where we're comparing two data values together, all those happen automatically. So that's important to know, when you're using these particular functions within the workflow, what can be done. Okay. So when you're actually creating the workflow at the high level, the canvas level, you're going to notice you have a number of different trigger modes. Okay. This trigger mode is specific to if there was an issue with the workflow, who do we notify? Okay. So you can actually trigger an email, you can reassign or email and reassign, and you can select a assignee. This happens when there's an exception in the particular process. In some cases, you might say, I don't want to use this at all. Okay, so you have that none radio button there to turn that on. When it comes to assignee mode, you have a number of different options. We typically use user. This means that, for instance, when we're routing an approval, it's either going to user or group. And you can spell out the group. It just needs to be in quotes. So if it was like AP users is the group, you would just do quote AP users, end quote. You'll see in our example, I actually just put manually my email in quotes. But you can also use these other assignee modes, things like round robin. It selects the first user and group and then the second, just like a round robin tennis tournament. Random, I don't know where that would even be used. I've never used that. Load balance, basically load balances. This is really helpful in situations where you have a customer service rep, you're essentially need to route these documents and make it equal. So if there's 3 CSR reps and one has 20 items in it, it will load balance the other 2. So everybody has about 20. And then whole group. If you just want to send it to everybody and the first to respond, or everybody needs to respond, whatever that logic is. Okay, so that's when you're setting up the core workflow, which we'll show. Now, once you're in the workflow and you're starting to add steps in the workflow, you're going to notice certain dialogues have multiple inputs and certain ones don't. So as you can see, inputs and outputs. Inputs are the variables that you want to ingest. That could be the to and the from address for an approval. The output might be, I want to extract a relative data value and put it in the text field. So you're going to see things like formatting wise, you're going to see something like the squiggly 0 and squiggly 1, which are basically, as you see here in the screenshot, assignee and content type. Assignee, the first box is 0. So what you're basically doing in the format here, you see AP invoice squirrely brackets 0. So it'd be essentially the title would show up as AP invoice 0 would be the assignee. Let's just say that's Brent Wessler. So it would literally format the title as AP invoice space Brent Wessler and whatever the content type is. We'll just say it's AP invoice. So that's how it, when you're using inputs and outputs, that's how it knows what input to use. It always starts 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Right? Literals are always in quotes. And you'll notice system variables will always be with a $sign. So you have system variables like text, status, title. These are variables that the system provides. So for instance, if I use the text, which you're going to see in our demonstration, that will allow me to basically take all the OCR that we extract and put it into the text layer of the document. Okay. Things like assignee are $sign assignee. That will put the current assignee of the workflow into that field. And there's a bunch of them. Now, you will notice there are, it's a little different. So all your custom fields, things like invoice number, contract party, employee name, whatever it is always going to be with a $sign field dot name. Okay. And you'll see that that's important. Now, if you are launching the workflow designer separately from Docstar using that little box, just note any changes you make in Docstar within a content type, a field, or whatever will not be shown in the workflow designer. You got to make sure you refresh the browser anytime you add or change anything in Docstar. I'll show you that. All right, so the first workflow we're going to do is request input from user. Here, we're going to prompt the user to enter something. Okay. So there's a bunch of predefined prompts. The benefit of the predefined prompts is it'll give you drop downs automatically. So prompt for content type would just give you a drop down of all the content types in the system. Prompt for folder would give you a folder view where you can select the folder. Same with inbox. Same with record category and the others. You also have just prompt user, which will be just a generic prompt. Okay. So you can use daisy chain prompts. So for instance, I can prompt, Brent for value. And then based on that value, I can do some logic to then prompt him for another value based on that value, right? So again, to access the workflow designer, I'm going to click on the admin tab here and you'll see workflow designer. Now I'm on a newer version, so you'll notice most of you might see it at the top. So this bar here on the left will be kind of at the top of the screen. That will change with our new version upgrade. And you'll see here, I just click this little icon there, which now gives me this workflow designer. And when I talk about refreshing, what I mean is this here, if I make any change in here, so if I come into the content type and I add a field or, add a field here or something like that, and I save it, just note that this doesn't know that you made that change. So all I do is come up to the top and hit this refresh, and it makes sure that I have that change. Okay. So let's look at a workflow. So the first thing, this is, as you see, the new workflow here. You'll notice to the right is this little pencil icon. This is where we find that trigger mode. So for instance, if there was some issue and something happened and I want this to go to Brent, essentially email him, I can do that. Otherwise, as you see here, by default, don't need to enable that. The security class here needs to match your content type. Okay. So we're just going to use a user prompt. We're going to do HR. So I'm going to select HR here, and in the workflow name, I'm going to HR test. Okay, and then I'm going to hit OK. Okay, and then I'm going to come up here, and the first thing I want to do is prompt a user. Okay, so we're going to come up to the name at the top, and we're going to say prompt. We're going to call it user prompts. Okay. And in the assignee mode, I'm going to do no change. Okay. And then but that's where you can select random, whole group, load balance, and you can see based on when I select, other information becomes available. Okay, but we're going to use no change. Now, I could hit the add button here, and this is going to bring up like the 84 different things. You're going to notice some things are blacked out. So at the top where you see workflow type document, package, universal, Package Works is an add-on module, and you'll notice that all the package items are grayed out. That's because I'm doing a document workflow, not a package workflow. If you want to do a package and a document workflow, you would select Universal, that radio button right there, and that would allow these items to be ungrayed out. Now, in this case, we're going to prompt the user. So we're going to go down to user prompt. Okay, and we just drag it in. Okay, and so the user prompt. Okay, the user prompt is gonna be HR. So we're gonna say select document. I'm sorry. Enter employee name. Okay, now we want to make that required. The employee name is always going to be text. Okay, and then where do we want to store whatever they enter, and where do we want to store that? Okay, so we want to store that in the employee name field. And you notice when I just start typing a few things. One, you see the field dot, right? So I want this employee name field. This is the field I want. Now, theoretically, I could also use like any of these system generated fields. So I could set the employee name to the assignee, right? And that could dictate the workflow. You know, if it was a date and I wanted to set the current date to that field, I could use any one of these. So these are all the system values. Anything that doesn't have the $ field dot, you'll notice right here, these are all of our custom fields starting, but anything above this account number field are all the variable fields. So in this case, we're going to do employee name is going to go into the employee name field. So employee name, and we'll hit OK. And we'll call these user prompts. Okay. Now, we might want to drop down, right? So in this case, we have a document type called a drop down. And so you have a couple of options here. You got simple drop down, but we're going to use the regular drop down. And the difference between simple and drop down is that I want to bind this to a list. Okay, so I have my HR doc type here. So I just select the list I already have. And I'm going to say select document type. And then I'm going to want this to go to the document type field. Okay, so what's going to happen here is when the user sees this, they're going to see a drop-down list of all the different kinds of document types. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK on that. Okay, so very simple. We prompt somebody for 2 different values. Now, we'd like to format the document. So the other capability here is to add a format. And so, for instance, I like to use this advanced format. But as you notice, there's lots of different formatting. So you do also have format here. This is more simplistic. So you can see here, we only have an input and an output. The advanced format gives us a little more flexibility. So we have multiple inputs. Okay, so you notice here, this one actually has this add button. So I want to use, so the first one is I want to take the employee name, and I also want to grab that document type field. So these are the 2 fields that we have added prior, and I want to output into the title field. You'll notice title is just a variable. So I basically want to take the employee name and I want to put a hyphen and then the document type. Okay, so what I do here at the bottom is I just do squirrely bracket 0 and then a hyphen and then a 1. Add, you know, whatever the employee name, it's going to be Brent Wessler and then a hyphen and then the document type. Let's say it's an application. Okay, that's what happens here as part of that. Now, another nice thing that you can do is once you have a, for instance here, once I have an added, this particular format, if you want to save it, you have this add to library function. If I hit this add to library, I'm just going to say format here. It's going to add that to, you'll see here, to this area. This is your library, right? So the benefit is if you hit add to library, all you need to do is just drag the format in for every one. So if you're doing this over and over for multiple content types, multiple workflows, by hitting add to library allows you to reuse those components. Okay, so we'll hit, and then we'll say we're going to save this, hit the save, and we're going to call this HR test, hit OK, and we're now done. So to test this, we're now going to come in. I already have an HR workflow, but if you didn't, you would come to content type. We would call this HR test. And you'll notice in our dropdown, we have all of our workflows. Where's HR test, save, okay. And again, they get out of sync. So if I have to refresh here, you notice they kind of get out of sync. So I made a workflow designer. Now in the workflow, you should see HR test. But you notice it was in the list before because I had made all those changes because the workflow designer is in its own tab. So you just have to make sure that you just refresh the browser. And that's all you need to do is just enable HR test to the content type. You could also do this ad hoc. So if I come into our capture now and I select HR as my example, okay, I'm going to enable the auto view. I'm going to hit browse and I'm going to just select a HR sample HR document. Let's just grab Brent's and we have his application here. But okay, so here HR prompt. I don't want to use HR prompt. I want to use HR test. And then you can see I can literally change that on the fly. And now when I hit upload, you're going to see what it does. So first off, notice top left-hand corner, the workflow accordion. It's right there. This is where that user needs. Now, theoretically, I could do this. I could just come in and type in Brent Wessler down here and hit save, and I could do that. The issue is that that workflow accordion won't go away until you do one of two things. One, you can come up and remove from workflow. So you could just get rid of the workflow. You could also do it here on the workflow and just do remove from workflow. And what would happen is it would just get rid of this and it wouldn't stay in the workflow queue. That's what a lot of you guys are doing. Somebody's manually keying in the content fields, never answering these questions, and then this thing just sits in a workflow. Now, it is fully searchable, but again, the workflow is doing other things beyond, in this case, it was naming the title and all that information, right? So it's important that you use the workflow, and you can also use any of these workflow prompts in conjunction with our lasso OCR. So I can use my lasso OCR and drag, as you notice here, I put my cursor in the box and then I just drag a box around that value and it populates. As you notice here, the title, using that advanced format, it automatically then tags it. You also see that it put in these two values as well. The capture workflow, which would be the next one, this is one of the more common ones that I get asked about. Here, I'm just going to show you some basic stuff. We've done some crazy things, but overall, OCR is only going to work on computer-generated text. It's not going to work on handwriting. There is no charge for this. It's free and an unlimited from Docstar. I will say, when you are OCRing, typically the documents that you generate, things like AR invoices, packing slips, checks that you create, are the better candidates for using OCR. The reason for that is because the data is always in the same spot. versus something like a vendor invoice. You're never going to be able to use the OCR for this. We have a separate tool for normalizing unstructured documents. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very basic example of using OCR to extract all the data from a document. The OCR does not use page registration. What that means is if you scan the same document at 200 DPI versus 300 DPI, that document scales and shifts significantly. Okay, so just know the zone OCR can't move, right? So if you say, hey, it's in this corner in this area, and then you scan at different DPI, that zone is going to shift. Okay, so this is not an end all be all. This works really well when you have a lot of white space around a character. In certain situations, it's just, we might need to use a different approach. I will say if it is an image that you're capturing, a JPEG, a GIF, a PNG, even something like a JPEG, we would use the OCR one. Now there is an extract text. So if you have text searchable documents, PDFs, Word documents, Excel, those types of things, we can use extract text to actually create the text layer versus physically using OCR. What that means is there's already a text layer there. We utilize it for searching. We're going to create a new search. So the first OCR capture workflow we're going to do full text OCR. Okay, and we're going to hit the add button, and you're going to notice if we scroll down to OCR, it's blue. Okay, so we just dragged it in, which means I have to have the client running, the Docstar client running. Now, in this case, as you'll notice, it doesn't give any inputs. It just gives outputs. Okay, and the output for the text layer is just text. Okay, and I can select. So there's a bunch of recognition modes here. Auto is probably the easiest one, but if you're getting dot matrix and the OCR just isn't like reading really well, you can play around with some of the recognition modes. And you can also enable some deskewing and despeckling. Okay. So in this case, all I want to do is take every word off every page and text search it. So I'm going to get region. Now you're going to want this all pages radio checkbox, and I'm going to hit search. And I'm just going to grab any multi-page document. So I'm just going to select this one. Now, I like to grab the section there. Now I'm going to right click on the document, do recognition, get region, and then I'm just going to drag a big blue box. Okay, and it's okay if it's over. So the idea is every page is now going to be looked at, and every word on every page is going to be searched, essentially. And it's all going to go into this text particular layer. Okay, so we'll hit OK on that. And we'll call this full page OCR, or we'll just call this OCR. Now, we can also use this to look at a particular zone, okay? So here, we can also do that, and I'm going to say the zone we want this to go into is the vendor name, okay? So vendor, I think it's underscore name. There we go. Okay, and I want it to be English. So in this case, I'm not saying I want to look at the entire thing. I just want to look in a particular zone. So we'll do a search. I have Acme Company. We're going to process the Acme Company invoice. So here I want to grab this Acme Company. Now, a couple things. One, this bar here to the left, depending on how you're scanning it, may shift. Okay. So this isn't, it's not a lot of white space around this zone. So this zone might shift here, might shift there. But again, in this case, because it's very structured, I'm going to say, hey, pull that and then put that in the vendor name field. Okay. And we'll hit OK, and we'll hit OK, and we'll hit save, and we'll call this OCR. Okay. All right, so now let's go back to capture and let's capture something. We're going to capture an invoice in this case. Let's browse out and grab that particular Acme Company invoice. And when we do that, we're just going to change the workflow. Now, one of the things here to note is that security class. Okay, so here where it says accounts payable, okay, just make sure whatever workflow you're adding this to that content type, whatever that content type is, whatever that security class for that content type is, make sure it's the same here. They need to match. Otherwise, people won't see these workflows. Okay. All right. So we're going to now change this to OCR. Again, I got to refresh that. It was OCR. Okay. And then save that. And now hit upload, and you're now going to see the document. It's in the distributed queue, which means the client's running. It's running OCR, and a few things here. One, it read the vendor name using that field. Where's the text, right? So to find that, you're going to go to the actions menu, show document text. So what you see here, that's that $ text. Now I could search for anything on this. So I want to look for the word, let me grab this phone number here, for instance. Copy. Now, when I search for this, okay, it's now going to show all the documents, in this case, that invoice. But where's that phone number? So you'll notice now when I use any string search in the body of the document, it's now going to show on the show, you'll see now hits. Okay, so when you're searching for a value that's in the text layer, it will now, when you do show hits, it will now show on the text layer where it found those words and how many. So in this particular example, we can also use database lookups or data links. So many of you might have this already. Here in this example, we're going to bring in that same invoice, but we're going to use the PO number to go out to the database and pull back other relative information. And then we're going to route it based on a hierarchy of approval levels. Okay, so this is a multi-step workflow. In this case, we're going to be using branch conditions. So what is a branch condition? And this is where you get to that advanced workflow. And you can see here in the screenshot, you have branching. So if it goes for approval and I hit deny or reject, it goes to this cube, the red cube, which then does something. If I hit approve, it goes this way. If it's $100,000 and it's this type of vendor, then, route it this way. Okay, so you're going to see here in the branch condition is approved. Again, that is the $. These are system. So essentially, if a user clicks approve, what step do you want to call? And in this case, you see it calls this yellow step here. If it is rejected, what step does it go to? Okay. And so there's a couple ways to basically set this up. Now, I've done it in a very simplistic way just for our purposes today. So what I'm going to do is we're going to come in, and I've already kind of set this up because there's a lot here. This is kind of what I set up. So the first thing I did was our first example, which is a user prompt. And everybody kind of, I think, understands that. So I'm prompting a user to enter a purchase order number. Okay, and then I'm putting in the PO number field. Okay, so once I've done that, it then will call. Now, of course, I could do the user prompt and then the data link in one of these steps. Don't necessarily need to do it in 2 steps. But the next step you'll see here is the data link. So we'll use the data link function. And you'll notice because in the first step, we said, hey, enter a PO number and then put that in the PO number field. Well, we're passing that PO number field here to the database lookup, and it's then going to populate the vendor name, invoice number, invoice total, and any document status. Okay, so in our case, user enters the PO number, it goes out and pulls those 3 fields. Once that happens, then it's going to prompt for approval. So with Docstar, it's a 2-step process. So the first thing is request approval. So you're going to notice on the left here, request approval. You see that? We drag that over. And in this case, who do you want it to go to? So I have it here statically putting in Brent Wessler. Now, if there's an AP users, that's a group of users, I could do that. I could have it go to a variable like assignee. Okay. Or owner, the owner of the document, the person that put it in. In this case, I just wanted to go to Brent, and you're going to notice when I, actually it's B. Wessler, when I do that, you're going to notice it will find all the people in our user log, meaning Vital ECM. That's the one I want. Okay, and then what user override notification. So if a user says, "Hey, I don't want to receive notifications about the invoice," you can override that. You can say, "I don't care. You're going to get a notification." Notify means you're going to get a system notification. We'll show you what that looks like. Approval required, meaning you have to approve it. You notice that's it. Okay. Now we need something for them to actually click on. So you're going to see here, there's something called user approval, and this is going to show an approve and deny button. Okay. So you start with the request approver and then show the user approval. And this is going to give them the ability to click approve or deny. Now we also need to send the email as well. Now in my case, you could add the send email. So you're going to see here, RS send email. So I could add the send email here or above. But as you notice, when I did request approval, notify was there. But the request approval notify is very, very basic notification. So if you want like very robust approval notification, you'd use the send email. And you can see you can attach, the document and a bunch of other stuff versus the notify, which you'll see is very, very parochial. All right, so let's now bring in a document and go through that process. So we'll take our same AP invoice here, and then we're going to change the workflow. And we're going to show it going through and what emails we get. Okay, so we're going to come in here and I'm going to select AP approval and hit the upload. And now you're going to see the prompt. In this case, it's looking for the PO number. So we'll use our lasso OCR. It grabs that PO number. Sometimes it grabs some stuff we don't want. Now this is the Datalink. When I hit submit here, it's going to take this value and then populate the vendor name, the total, and the invoice number. Okay. Now you'll notice once it populated this information, it immediately shows the related documents. Now, Brent got an email notification. So theoretically, if I'm Brent now, you'll see this is the email that got generated. It's very simplistic, right? So this is that little notify check mark on the request approval. Okay. Now in this case, I'm going to hit the PDF link here, and this is going to launch the document. So here's the document, and you can now see it's with this assignee, and now I have the approve or deny. Okay. Now, if I go to the workflow and I go to my AP approval workflow, this is also where I can grab that workflow. So you can simply select the workflow, and then you can see the workflow here and approve or deny. Now, on the right, what I have happening is when I hit approve, it's going to go to this approve folder. You notice there's nothing in here. Okay. So when you go back to here and approve this, hit approve, this is now going to be moved into the approved folder. Okay. Now, on the branch condition of that, as you'll notice here, when I go to the approvals, branches, as you can see, is approved, go to to the approve step. And that's basically going to just add it to the approved folder underneath accounting. If it's denied, then it goes to the denied folder. So these lines here that you see are dictated on these branch notifications. And you can add as many branching as you want. You know, maybe if there's nobody takes action, then it just goes right to the end. So you get to decide, you know, what and how those branch conditions execute.